Hi there. I am here in the ceramics room, a place where artists come to engage in an art form that is as old as the Stone Age. In this introduction video, I'm going to discuss a few basic ideas about ceramics, the process with working with clay and pottery, how it can be heated up and fired in a kiln, and then how glazes can be applied. Now, perhaps some of you have had the chance to create ceramics firsthand. It's a wonderful art form, and it continues to thrive to this very day. Okay, so when looking at the ceramic process, one of the first things an artist must do when working with clay is remove all the air pockets inside the clay. You may not even be able to see the air pockets, but if they're there, things might explode in the kiln later on. So it's important to just go ahead and remove these air pockets there in the first step. It's a process called wedging. Now, to wedge your clay, you can throw or knead the clay by pressing down on it and rolling out any possible air that may be inside. Now, once you do that, you can start working with your form. There are a few things to remember when working with clay. One, you don't want your clay to be too thick. The thicker it is, the more likely for air to be trapped inside. So a typical rule of thumb is that your clay should not be thicker than your thumb, or no more than 1 inch, okay? But at the same time, clay can be fragile and thin parts can break. So you also don't want your clay forms to be thinner than about 1/4 of an inch. So those are important things to keep in mind. As you're working with clay, if you need to attach 2 separate pieces, you actually have to create a rough surface at the attachment points of both of these pieces. This is called scoring, and you can score your clay by scratching into both sides, adding a bit of water, and then attaching the pieces. This will kind of help interlock the forms together and will prevent detachment later on. Throughout the process, it's important that you keep your clay moist. You don't want it to dry out and then be forced to start all over. Now, if you want to work on your project over multiple sessions, you can prevent your project from drying out by wrapping it in a moist paper towel and then covering it in a plastic bag. This will help keep the air out and hopefully keep your clay moist, allowing you to pick back up where you left off. When an artist is completed with their project, they will need to let it dry out until it reaches bone dry status, which can take about a week. And then when the clay is dry, it can be put into a kiln. A kiln is a special kind of oven that fires or heats up things like pottery. A lot of artists now use computerized kilns, which allows them the convenience to be able to select their firing temperature and then walk away. Heat temperature of kilns are measured in units called cones. Ceramics can be fired at various cone temperatures, depending on the type of clay used and the desired effects. When clay is heated at low fire, the kiln is heated up to around 1900 degrees, whereas a kiln at high fire, heat gets up to 2300 degrees. After the clay is fired and cooled, it's ready to be glazed. A glaze is like a liquid glass that can give color to the ceramic piece, and it can be matte or shiny. Most glazes require several coats and do not look like the intended color upon application, and so artists need to keep this in mind. Once a piece is glazed and then fired again in the kiln, a chemical reaction takes place, and it turns the glaze into its final color. So there you have it. Those are just some of the basics of hand building with clay and the ceramic process. I know we didn't get into throwing pots on the wheel and other aspects of ceramics, but I hope that this has provided just a little bit of insight into the process of this very rich tradition and art form that continues to thrive today. We'll see you next time.